Welcome to part two of this study of end times prophecies. I'm excited to have you join me as we continue to dive into the prophecies found in the book of Daniel. So, in part one, we talked about the vision of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2, but today we're going to be diving into a vision that Daniel himself had, and it's recorded in Daniel chapter 7. Now, what's interesting about this particular vision is that it occurs in the first year of the reign of Belshazzar, who is the son and successor of Nebuchadnezzar. So, this vision that Daniel's going to be sharing is occurring 50 years later, 50 years after where we left off in our first part. Now, what I'm going to be doing is focusing in on the four beasts that Daniel sees in his vision. And once we dive into each of those beasts, I want us to jump ahead to Revelation 13 and consider how those beasts may be related to the beast that John later sees and records in that chapter, because there's definitely a relationship there. So that's what I want to be diving into today. So go ahead and grab your Bibles, grab your notebook, and let's get going. Okay, so I'm going to be reading from the ESV. So Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, I want to make a note here, the four winds of heaven. Now, Daniel 7 was written in Aramaic. However, there is the same phrase that shows up in Zechariah 6, which is written in Hebrew, but it also says the four winds of heaven. Now, in Hebrew, the word for wind is ruach, and that can also be translated to spirit. And in Zechariah's vision, it seems that the four winds of heaven that he saw in that vision correspond to the four horsemen of the apocalypse that is captured later in Revelation. So I don't know if Daniel is seeing just four winds, like there's an actual wind, or if he's actually seeing spirits in this vision, because this is a phrase that shows up elsewhere in the Old Testament. But it is out of that sea, okay? So four great beasts came up out of the sea, and they were different from one another. So Daniel sees four distinct beasts, okay? And that's going to be different from what is described in Revelation. Revelation 13 shows one beast. So what I want us to do here in Daniel is let's consider each of these particular beasts one by one and what they could mean for us. So, verse 4, the first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then, as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. So, I believe that the lion represents modern day England. Okay, because we find out later in verse 12 that the first three beasts, which represent nations, that they still exist at the time of the fourth beast being destroyed and thrown in, or destroyed by fire, which corresponds to Revelation 19 when the beast of Revelation is thrown into the lake of fire. So if Daniel's fourth beast and the Revelation 13 beast are the same, then that means it's happening in the end of days. And in verse 12 of Daniel 7, it says that the first three beasts were still alive. And in fact, their lives were extended for a season and a time. So we know that England, modern day England, corresponds to the symbol of a lion. So some interpret these four beasts as ancient kingdoms, with the lion representing Babylon. But I don't think that's true, because that would mean the fourth beast would be Rome, and we have a lot of reasons to know that it's not Rome. So like I said, if the fourth beast corresponds to the beast in Revelation 13, then these other three beasts have to be modern nations, okay? Now, I believe that what Daniel is seeing is symbolic representation of global empires that existed before the fourth beast, but also continue to exist in some fashion at the time of the fourth beast. So England would fit that because we know that the British Empire rose up, right? And then it dwindled in its power and its reach, but England still exists today. And as we talked about in part one, everything that we're seeing is really history repeating itself, right? But I talked about it being a spiral because we're moving forward. That with each iteration that the spirit of Nimrod rises up and attempts to establish a one world government and a one world religion, right? God continues to put it down because the obstacles that God created at the Tower of Babel continue to present the challenge to the enemy to be successful in his goal. And that is going to be the case until the final iteration. And as I shared in part one, I believe we are either in the final iteration or we're in the second to last, because we know that through technology that exists today, we have overcome all of those obstacles. But I really personally am convinced we're in the final iteration. Now, whether it's going to be in my lifetime or in my children's lifetime, I do believe that the end of days is soon, because we are seeing fulfillment of prophecy today like never before. And we'll continue to get into that as we dive into the prophetic visions of Daniel and then later of John that show that there are things happening now that have never happened, not in any previous iteration. So I believe that these prophetic visions may be multi-layered, where perhaps at the time of Babylon, that would pertain to this first beast, but today it pertains to modern England. Okay, so as I said, it represents the British Empire, which started in 1497. Now, recall what the verse said. It was a lion that had eagle's wings that were then plucked off. Well, what nation today is represented by the eagle? The United States. And the United States, as the eagle, as the eagle's wings that were once attached to the lion to England, well, we plucked ourselves off by declaring independence in 1776 and then winning the Revolutionary War in 1783. So that again corresponds, right? It's a modern day nation that was an empire that still exists today, that's represented by a lion that once had eagle's wings attached to it that were then plucked off. Now, by 1920, England governed a quarter of the world's population and controlled a quarter of the world's land mass. So that's how large and extensive the British Empire was at its peak. But it started to dwindle and shrink after World War I and then World War II, as more nations started to declare their independence, with some being completely independent and others continuing to maintain some sort of affiliation. Think Canada, Australia, where they're a part of the United Kingdom, but they are independent in the sense that they have their own government. So going back to our text in Daniel 7, in verse 5, it describes the second beast, and it describes it like a bear. And it says the bear was raised up on one side, and it had three ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. So, what would be the modern day nation whose symbol is a bear? It's Russia, the Russian bear. So, Russia is represented by the bear, okay? And we know that it is, quote unquote, raised up on one side because 75% of Russia's population is on the western side of that nation, and not just the western half. Really, you can see from this map, this density map, that it is predominantly the far west third, if not a quarter of the nation. So if you were to picture the weight of the population, right, it is going to be, quote unquote, lifted up on one side because it is not naturally or evenly distributed across the full landmass that is known as Russia. It is more densely populated in the West. So that one, Russia being symbolized by a bear, check. it being raised up on one side where it's dominant on its west side, check. And in fact, if you were to look at another map, as far as watching for where Moscow is and Jerusalem, Moscow is almost due north from Jerusalem. So that's also interesting that this bear, okay, that it is raised up on the side that is due north of Israel. What about the three ribs? There's debate about what the three ribs represent. In the Old Testament, a rib is symbolic of a structural side to either a human being, like our rib cage, or to an object. There are verses that describe the ribs of the altar. So we know that the Old Testament symbology is going to think of a rib as a structural side or something to the side or on the side. When I looked into the history of Russia, one thing I found was its growth being in stages where it slowly devoured its neighboring countries. So it went after three ribs, which would be historically the nations that it conquered in order to establish itself as an empire. But you can also look at it in modern terms if you're still thinking neighboring countries, because I don't know if it is describing it as having three ribs in the past when it was still a substantial empire, or if it has the three ribs in its mouth at the end of days or in the end times at the time that the fourth beast rises up. If it is in modern times and we are talking neighboring countries, what's really interesting is if you look at the neighboring countries around Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan both have alliances with Russia. So even though Russia hasn't quote unquote conquered them and absorbed them into that nation, it is holding those two ribs in its mouth. So it depends on what that visual means, right? Is it devouring it? Is it holding it? Has it absorbed it into itself? So if it is about conquering and devouring and absorbing it into itself, it may be a historical reference to the neighboring countries that historically it absorbed. But if we're talking modern times, right now, Belarus and Kazakhstan have an alliance with Russia. Look at how Ukraine is one of the other possible ribs. And we know that there is an issue between Russia and Ukraine that has not been resolved. We're not sure when it's going to be resolved. Ukraine may end up being a third rib in Russia's mouth. We don't know. But if you look more toward the south, the countries that separate Russia from Israel would include Georgia or Azerbaijan. So, and I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. So it's possible that maybe the country of Georgia might end up being that third rib. We don't know. So there's a lot of debate about what the three ribs are and whether it's historical or whether it's modern. So I've also heard people talk about how they think that the three ribs could be China, Iran, and Syria, because we know that Russia has, I don't know if they have official alliances with all three countries, but we know that they definitely work together and have a relationship with each other. They also tend to be the nations that threaten Israel the most and the most forcefully and the most consistently. So we also look at the threat that they pose to the entire world. So China, Iran, and Syria, that's another one that gets tossed out as possibly the three ribs in the bear's mouth. Another idea I came across was that Russia actually had three different governments during the time that it was considered an empire. So Russian Empire was 1721 to 1917. Then for 5 years after that was Soviet Russia, and then it became the Soviet Union, and it was the Soviet Union from 1922 until 1991. Fast forward to 1999 is when Putin came into power, and he continues to be in power today. So the Russia of today is ran and controlled by Putin. So it's also possible the three ribs in the mouth could be the three previous governments that had been conquered or just, aren't in existence anymore. I tend to lean toward the ribs being neighboring countries because, as we're going to see in the third beast, I believe that if it was governments, it would be represented by heads and not by ribs. So when we start looking at the symbolism, a head in the Old Testament tends to represent a nation, a ruler, a king of some sort, whereas, like I said, ribs would be a structural side, something on the side, something that holds something together, holds something in. So I tend to lean toward the bear being Russia and either the ribs being historical growth and expansion into kind of the rise and fall of Russia as an empire, or it could be something to watch for in the news about what's going to happen between Russia and Ukraine, and could Ukraine be the third rib of modern times, or could it be Georgia or something like that? And again, it could be both because we could also be looking at layers as far as watching for patterns and watching for these things that are happening historically that would relate to the prophecy. So going back to Daniel 7, this time verse 6, in order to learn about the third beast that he saw in his vision. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a fowl on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Some translations will just say 4 wings of a bird. I know in my ESV it says bird, but I changed it to fowl because if you actually look in the Aramaic, it is fowl. And I think New King James may even say fowl. And that's important for the symbolism that it's not just the wings of any kind of bird, it's 4 wings of a fowl. Because in modern day times, the country that's represented by a leopard is Germany, and the country that's represented by a fowl, specifically a rooster, is France. So if we're looking at the third beast, it would be primarily Germany, but it would have some sort of alliance, affiliation, assistance from France. And there's a long history between Germany and France. And I'm going to relate those to the 4 heads because the 4 heads, as I just said a moment ago, often represents kings or kingdoms. Okay, so when we think about Germany, what did Hitler refer to his reign over Nazi Germany? He referred to it as the Third Reich. Reich is German for kingdom. So he saw himself establishing and heading up a third German empire, a third German kingdom. So if Germany in this particular image of Daniel's vision has 4 heads, then Hitler and Nazi Germany would have been the third head. So we need to talk about, well, what were the 2 heads before him and what would be the 4th head that came after him? So from what I could find about the history of Germany is that the First Reich would have been the Holy Roman Empire from 800 AD to 1806 AD. Now, again, the dynamic, the history between Germany and France was Napoleon of France is who officially defeated and ended the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. So what ended the First Reich was France defeating it. The Second Reich started in 1870, and again, it was after a war with France, this time with France being defeated. So when we look at the end of the First Reich is when France defeated Germany, but the start of the Second Reich is with Germany then defeating France. And that is what established the German Empire, which lasted from 1870 to 1919. So think about 1919, we're now getting into World War I period, right? Well, part of what happened to Germany being defeated in World War I is that the sanctions that were put up against it is actually what set the stage for Hitler to rise and establish the Third Reich, which was Nazi Germany, and it was officially in power from 1933 to 1945, which is during the Second World War. And part of what Hitler did was invaded France and truly defeated France. And if it hadn't have been for the United States stepping in, then France would not have stood a chance. They were defeated by Germany. So again, this dynamic between France and Germany giving bookmarks, or not bookmarks, bookends to the Reichs, I think is really reinforcing the relationship between the leopard and then the rooster or the fowl wings. So the First Reich ended because France defeated it. The Second Reich started because Germany defeated France. Then it ended because of World War I. And then it started in 1933. And during that time, once again, it defeated France. Okay, so here we go back and forth. So what would the Fourth Reich be? What's that fourth head? What I found that I think is really compelling, okay, is that after World War II, France and Germany co-sponsored, co-established the European Coal and Steel Commission. If you follow historically what happens from that commission, it ultimately results in the European Union. So when we're looking at the Fourth Reich, what I saw was the hypothesis or the theory that the Fourth Reich is happening right now, and it's the European Union. Okay, so when we're looking at these beasts, we currently have the British Empire with the lion with the eagle's wings that were plucked off, that rose as an empire and has now fallen as an empire. It's no longer a global threat, a global empire. However, it still exists. Same thing with Russia, the bear. It rose as an empire, it fell. It's no longer an empire, but it still exists. And then now we have the leopard with the wings of a fowl, but it has four heads. So far, three of the heads have risen and fallen, and we're on potentially the fourth head, which would be the European Union. Okay, so I'm hoping you're tracking so far and that this is making sense, because I'm just sharing with you of all the theories that I've seen, everything I've investigated, looking into the history myself. This is what I find to be compelling and interesting. And that's really my attitude about it, is I believe this is compelling. I believe there's a lot of evidence to support it. However, we're still going to hold it with loose hands, because we won't know for sure until Christ's second coming, and we can look back and see, okay, that's what really played out. Right now we're just trying to understand the clues and the hints that were given through these symbols in order to, again, read the season, read the times, be awake, and be ready for Christ's return. So we're not trying to use this, like I said last time, as a secret decoder ring to try to figure out exactly when Jesus is coming so that we can stop paying our mortgages and we can all just hide away in our underground bunkers just waiting for him to come back. That is not what this is about. This is supposed to put an urgency on God's people to go and spread the gospel, to bring people into relationship with Christ, because we know he's coming. We're supposed to be like Noah and the ark, trying to get people to come on the ark because we know the end is coming. So let's go back to Daniel, and now we're going to read about the fourth beast. The fourth beast has a lot of verses dedicated to it, and it's broken up. So I'm going to read all of them, skipping over the passages that don't relate to the fourth beast, because I want us to get the full picture of the fourth beast without getting off distracted or confused by looking at some of the other visions that Daniel had in the midst of this. So we're going to start in verse 7. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. So because it has iron teeth, that's why I said the preterists like to propose that the fourth beast was Rome. because we know from Nebuchadnezzar's vision that the legs of iron were Rome. However, just like in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, there were feet that was iron mixed with clay, which is the Holy Roman Empire, and then there were toes that extended off of it. So just because it has iron in it doesn't mean it's Rome, but instead there are elements of Rome in it or about it. And so we'll talk about that as we continue to look through the description of the beast. But just know that's one reason why preterists will say, "Oh, this has already happened. This is already done." And here's the evidence that the fourth beast is Rome, because it's once again talking about iron, but we know iron can mean more than that. It also doesn't necessarily mean it equates to the to Rome just because its teeth were made out of iron. So that's something to kind of think about for sure. Okay, so picking up where I left off, it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which three of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So skipping down to verse 11. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So this is what I was referencing before, and the reason why I believe the first three beasts represent nations that still exist today, because when I read in verse 11 about the destruction of the beast, to me it sounds exactly like Revelation 19:20, which says, "And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur." So its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. Well, that's what happens in Revelation 19 to the beast of the end times. So I believe the fourth beast in Daniel's vision is the same as the beast in Revelation. And if that's the case, then the rest of the beasts, the other three beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged. So those nations still exist at the time that the fourth beast not only rises to power, but also gets destroyed. Jumping down to verse 19, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which right there again, so it has teeth of iron, but then has claws of bronze, right? So bronze would have been Greece. So I'm not sure that these two metals necessarily correspond to Nebuchadnezzar's dream. But anyway, which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which three of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. Okay, so he's seeing 10 horns, but in the midst, an 11th horn comes up. And even though it's a little horn, one, it uproots three of the original horns, and it speaks these great blasphemous things against God, and it seems like it has more power than the other 10 horns. So it says, as I looked, verse 21, as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Until when? Until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Okay, that hasn't happened yet. Yes, Jesus came in his first coming, but judgment was not given for the saints at the time of his first coming. Judgment is reserved for his second coming. And the kingdom is in heaven, and we bring it to earth through the connection we have with the Holy Spirit dwelling inside of us, but also by being his hands and feet, being his representatives, right? Think about the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, your kingdom come, right? Your will be done. We're supposed to be bringing the kingdom into the earth. We're supposed to be representing the kingdom of heaven. But it is not until after Jesus comes back that his kingdom is established on the earth and we get to actually possess it. Okay, so that's why I have these references to Revelation 6, 9 through 11, and Revelation 20, verse 4. Specifically, Revelation 20, verse 4 is where it says that's when judgment happens. So this hasn't happened yet. So the little horn, okay, that 11th little horn, it is going to make war with the saints. It is going to prevail until Jesus comes back and judgment happens. So continue on with verse 23. Thus he said, this is the angel talking to him. As for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth. So the beast is a kingdom, but it'll be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. So again, same note as last time when it says devour the whole earth. I'm not sure if it means the literal whole earth as we know it today, or if it is speaking to the whole known world, like what they considered the earth in biblical times, which would be like Europe and Asia Minor and the Middle East and North Africa. So I'm not sure how far the beast kingdom and its reign will be. It could very well cover the whole earth. I don't know, but it could also be limited to that portion of the world. Now, as for the 10 horns that's on this kingdom's head, right? This kingdom is the beast, as 10 horns. Out of this 10 kings shall arise. So the horns on the beast is a kingdom, and the 10 horns on it are 10 kings. And then it says, and another shall arise after them. So what he's saying is, you got the 10, but then another one, an 11th one, comes up, right? And it says, and he shall be different than the other 10 from the former ones, and he shall put down 3 of the kings. So the angel's just now explaining what you watched with the 10 horns. There's going to be 10 kings, but then another one is going to come up and uproot 3 of them, and he's going to be different. He's going to be greater, stronger. He's going to have more power, all of that. And then he goes on to say, again, he shall speak words against the Most High. So once again, this is going to be someone who's going to be blasphemous, who's going to be saying horrible things. But guess what? Also, wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. And they, the saints, shall be given into his, the little horn, his hand for a time, times, and half a time. That equals 3.5 years. And I want you to make note of that 3.5 year idea, because it's going to come up over and over and over again as we continue to study end times prophecy. And at the end of this lesson, I am going to talk about Daniel's final week in Daniel chapter 9, so that we can start to actually build out a potential timeline for the last 7 years leading up to Christ's return. But it says right here, that little horn that rises up, we refer to it as the antichrist, the final Nimrod. Okay, so there's going to be this beast, a kingdom, and the kingdom's going to have these 10 kings. Well, that corresponds to the 10 toes from Daniel 2. So same thing, 10 toes were 10 kings in the end of days. Well, the 10 horns are 10 kings in the end of days. So this beast kingdom is somehow going to have 10 nations that are a part of it. Now, again, I don't know if it's a literal 10 or a figurative 10, but among those, you're going to have an 11th rise up. That's going to be the final Nimrod, the Antichrist. In his ascension to power, he's going to uproot 3 of those 10. So kind of watching for that. But then it says he's going to say blasphemous things against God, and he's going to make war on the saints and prevail against them. He's going to wear the saints out. The saints are going to be given into his hand for 3.5 years. So how do we know that corresponds to the end times beast? Well, in Revelation 6, 9 through 11, so when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge? Okay, so that's Jesus' second coming. So how long will you until you go back? And how long until you return to judge and avenge us, right? Because we know vengeance belongs to the Lord. So these are the souls of the saints who've been slain for the word of God, slain for their witness, slain for their testimony. They're sitting up in heaven under the altar, asking Jesus, how much longer until you go back and avenge us and judge those who wronged us? Then they were each given a white robe. We'll get more into that white robe in another lesson, but they were told to rest a little longer or sleep a little longer. And we know from the New Testament, sleep is a euphemism for death. So he's basically saying you're going to need to stay dead for a little bit longer before we go back, because we know that when he comes back is the resurrection, and the dead shall rise first. So he's saying to them, you need to rest a little longer, keep sleeping, you need to stay dead a little bit longer. It's not quite time for me to go back yet. But here's what he says: when will he come back? Until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So Jesus is saying, I can't go back until the full number has come in. Okay. When we dive more concertedly into Revelation, especially chapter 6, I'm going to tie it into Romans 11, where the fullness of the Gentiles has to come in. But what this is saying is fellow servants and brothers, that's Christians. So Jesus is talking at this point to the souls of the martyrs, saying there are going to be more martyrs. Okay. And then, like I said in Revelation 20, verse 4, this is judgment time. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshiped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So the ones who they're waiting on are going to be killed for their testimony of Jesus, for the word of God, but also these are the ones who are not going to worship the beast. So the people who believe that the church, the saints, are removed from the earth before the beast is allowed to, the antichrist is allowed to rise up and wreak havoc, that's just not true. Okay, so in Daniel 7, Revelation 6, Revelation 20, and there's also other places in Revelation that make reference to the fact that there are saints, the souls of the saints, who will be persecuted, who will be martyred. And guess what? It says right here, it's happening in the time of the beast, when they're not worshiping the beast and they're not taking the mark of the beast, which we'll get into, like I said, as we continue forward in our end times prophecy study, and we eventually will get to Revelation. So as I've already said, the fourth beast is an end time world government. It is not Rome. Okay, these are not events that have already happened. But we did see in Daniel 2 that the legs of iron were the Roman Empire, followed by the feet of iron mixed with clay, which was the Holy Roman Empire, followed by 10 toes that extend off the feet that have the same mixture. So the core of it is going to be the Holy Roman Empire revived, which we talked about means the European Union. Okay, so if we're looking at this saying, okay, like we're now tracking, right? All of this it's matching both Nebuchadnezzar's vision in Daniel 2, as well as the beast that Daniel is seeing in Daniel 7. And the 10 toes are the same as the 10 horns. They're 10 kings, okay, that are 10 nations. They're going to come out of the European Union. That's the fourth beast. The fourth beast is going to follow. It's going to come out of. The nations are going to come out of the European Union, because if the fourth head of the leopard is right now, that's the European Union. Then the fourth beast is going to be the end time one world government. But the 10 kings are going to come out of the European Union. So the 10 kings will be forming a separate government. Now, is that the United Nations? Possibly. Okay, so think about that. Or could there be some other governing body that gets established out of the European Union, but separate from it, or maybe a part of it, but something different and distinct? I don't know yet. These are the things that we're watching for. is what's happening in Europe with the European Union, what's happening with these globalists who are attempting to consolidate their power and to develop some sort of global governance system. That's what we're watching for, okay? So, as I said, I believe that Daniel saw four distinct beasts because he was watching a chronology of global empires rise and fall. Okay. But the fourth beast of his vision, I believe, is the same as the beast we read about in both Revelation 13 and Revelation 17. So I want you to keep the description that we read of the four beasts of Daniel's vision as we then jump to Revelation 13 and read the description that John gives us of the beast of the end times. And I'm going to highlight where I see evidence that they're the same, but also some insight that we do get from the first three beasts from Daniel's vision and how they relate to the fourth beast according to John's description. So reading in Revelation 13, starting in verse 1. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Pause there. That's the same. Daniel saw four beasts rising out of the sea. John is seeing this beast rise out of the sea. This beast has 10 horns and 7 heads. We'll get to that. With 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, Germany. Its feet were like a bear's, Russia. And its mouth was like a lion's mouth, England. Okay, so this beast that John is seeing has elements of the first three beasts that Daniel saw in his vision. Okay, and so to this beast, the fourth beast, to it, the dragon gave his power, that's Satan, and his throne and great authority. Okay, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So there are different theories about what the 7 heads are of this Revelation 13 beast. But what I noticed when I was comparing Daniel's vision side by side with Revelation 13 is that if you look across the four beasts from Daniel 7, the lion had a head, the bear had a head, the leopard then has 4 heads, and the fourth beast has a head. That's 7 heads. So I just want to present that as a potential interpretation is that what we're seeing now is the first 3 beasts from Daniel's vision, okay, are playing some kind of part in this final beast kingdom of the end times. So I don't know, what that's going to look like, but it's definitely possible that what we're seeing is the Daniel's 4 beasts now coming into one final beast because it does have aspects of it that are like the first 3 beasts, right? Like a leopard, like a bear, like a lion, and it has 7 heads, which if you looked at all 4 beasts together, collectively they would have 7 heads. So that's just what I noticed and what to me starts to again confirm what we're reading in Revelation 13. It's the same. It corresponds to what Daniel saw. Okay. So going to verse 5, and the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. We've already read that in Daniel. And it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. Well, guess what? 42 months is 3.5 years. So we read 3.5 years in Daniel 7:25. Now we're reading 3.5 years in Revelation 13:5. Okay, so the same thing if you compare the two, because Daniel's saying, here's the Antichrist, and he's speaking words against the Most High. He's wearing out the saints. They're given into his hand for 3.5 years. That's what John's seeing. The beast is given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. He's allowed to exercise authority for 3.5 years. Verse 6, it opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And that phrase, make war on the saints, was also in Daniel 7. Okay. But in Daniel 7, it said, make war on the saints and prevail against them. Here it's saying, make war on the saints and conquer them. So again, there's just too many similarities when you start to look at the visions side by side that I truly believe that the fourth beast of Daniel 7 and the beast of Revelation 13, that they're describing the same thing, which is the end time one world government or end time beast government that shall be coming sometime in the future. So what does all this mean? Well, Daniel's four beasts showed the rise and fall of three global empires who continue to exist today and who will somehow be a part of that fourth beast kingdom. So England, Russia, Germany slash the European Union, they're going to have some kind of role within the final one world government. Again, the 10 horns, 10 toes both represent 10 kings. So we're not sure if we're going to be looking for some kind of governing body that's comprised of 10 nations, or if that number 10 is just symbolic of the fact that they'll have that total control, total dominance and governance. Okay. Now, from among those 10 horns, okay, or in the midst of those 10 horns is going to be a little horn. That's going to be the antichrist. So once we have a sense that this final beast kingdom, this one world government, or this global governance system has been established, and all of a sudden we see one particular leader rise up, particularly in his ascension to power, displaces three of the other leaders or three of the nations that are a part of this coalition, because he's going to have great authority. And in the midst of this, he's going to be speaking blasphemous things against God, against Jesus, against the church, Christianity. And that's where he's going to make war on the saints for 3.5 years. And he's going to be allowed to do that. He's going to make war on the saints. That's going to be the time of great tribulation, when we are going to see people put into a place where they have to choose. Either you worship the beast and take its mark, or you don't and you risk death. Okay. That's nothing any of us want to hear. Okay. That's not anything any of us want to go through. But I want to caution against fear. Okay. This isn't supposed to be something we fear. It's not supposed to be something that we are cowering back or shrinking back. We're supposed to instead be encouraged by it, and we're supposed to be bold. We're supposed to be courageous. We're supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus, because again, how are we going to prevail? Well, those who prevail are the ones who keep to the testimony of the Lord and who do not love their own lives even unto death. So we're not supposed to worry about those who can destroy the body. Jesus said, worry about him who can destroy the soul, right? The Lord. So we're supposed to remain committed and allow our reverence for the Lord and our love for the Lord be what guides us. So this isn't supposed to be fear inducing. It's supposed to be something that is encouraging us, which means putting courage in us, right? This is supposed to be something that allows us to stand firm in the face of whatever the enemy is going to throw at us. But we just need to be prepared. There will come a time when Christians are persecuted even more than we currently see today. And when we eventually get to Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus himself talks about end times prophecies, you're going to see that it is a very unique period of time. But again, it's going to correspond to the 3.5 years. So this is the Antichrist that Jesus references in that Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. He even says the Antichrist in Daniel. Okay. So we know all these things from both Jesus's reference to Daniel 7, but also the visions that John gives in Revelation corresponding, okay, to Daniel's vision. Now, there is one more note about the beast, and it's in Revelation chapter 17. So let's take a look at that. So Revelation 17, starting in verse 7. But the angel said to me, this is John, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. Okay, so who's this woman? We'll get to that, but this is going to be the one world religious system. Okay, she's referred to as the harlot or the prostitute, or the mystery Babylon. There's some different ways people that reference this woman in Revelation, but the woman is the one world religious system, and the beast is the one world political system or one world government. And you can see she rides in on this government. So that's what he's talking about. But what I want to focus in on is what he's saying about the beast. Uh, we'll get to the woman and the one world religious system in a later lesson. But right now I want to finish out our discussion of the beast. So it says, the beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. Oh, I forgot to mention. So earlier when we were talking about the beast that had a mortal wound or seemed to have a mortal wound but then resurrected, so it could be that there is some sort of fake resurrection, that the antichrist or something about that, because the antichrist is going to claim to be the Messiah. So it's possible that there's some sort of like mortal wound or what appears to be a mortal wound, but then he miraculously recovers, or maybe they even play it off as a death but then he resurrects. I don't know. There's going to be some there, that's a possibility, but I've also heard it described as the third head on the leopard, because Germany was split in two, East Germany and West Germany, and that was the mortal wound that got healed up. So I just wanted to mention that, because when we're sitting here also talking about the beast that was and is not, is about to rise from the bottomless pit, go to destruction, and all of that. But it also says here that we need to be concerned about the people whose names are not written in the book of life. That's why as the church we need to stay on mission and be spreading the gospel, so that everybody whose name is supposed to be in the book of life is in the book of life. All right, so continuing on in verse 9. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. So when we talk about the woman, we'll talk about the 7 mountains she sits on. We're not going to get into that in this lesson. But those 7 heads also represent 7 kings or kingdoms, 5 of whom have fallen. One that is, the other has not yet come. Okay, so that's 5, 1, and 1. So 5 had fallen, 1 is, the other's not yet come. Now, when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. Okay, so we're still now talking about this dynamic between the 7 heads, and that 5 have fallen, 1 is not yet. But even when the one that is not yet does come, it's only going to be in power for a little while before the beast, which is an eighth, comes up. Just like that little horn comes up, this beast is going to be an eighth that comes up. However, it's not going to be from a separate part of the world. It's not going to be a nation that's unrelated to all the history that we've gone into, because in fact, that eighth belongs to the 7. So the 7, right, the eighth is going to somehow be affiliated with that. So whoever the Antichrist is, whoever this beast kingdom is. Okay. Verse 12, and the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. So whatever this beast is, there's the 10 horns on it, the 10 kings that are going to make up this one world political system, this one world governmental system. These are of one mind, and they hand their power and authority over to the beast. Okay, so they're going to hand and support the rise of this Antichrist. And they will what? Make war on the Lamb. Okay, but the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Hallelujah. That's why we're encouraged. And guess what? Those who are with the Lamb, those who are with Jesus, are called and chosen and faithful. Okay. So that's what we need to be. We need our name in the book of life, and we need to be called, chosen, and faithful if we're going to be with the Lamb and we're going to endure to the end so that we can be on the side of victory when the Lamb comes, when Jesus comes back and finally puts an end to what this beast kingdom is going to attempt to do. Okay. So there's debate again on the seven heads of the final beast. So some say the imagery that this angel is saying to John, it has to correspond to the time of John. Well, in the time of John, the head that is would be Rome. He's living in the Roman Empire. So the five that had fallen would be the five empires that preceded Rome: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Mede, Persia, and Greece. And then the one that would be to come would be the Holy Roman Empire. So then who's the eighth that belongs to the seventh? It would be the New World Order, or that final global government that comes out of the European Union, which is the revived Holy Roman Empire. Again, there may be layers to this. That may certainly be true. When the angel's talking to John, he may be presenting this. However, I don't believe that that's exclusively true. I don't believe that all of this has already happened. Okay. I think that there's a modern timing that corresponds to Daniel 7's beasts. So if the one that is the fourth head on the leopard, the Fourth Reich, which is the European Union, then the five that preceded it would be the five other heads. England having a head, Russia having a head, and then the first three of the German Reichs. Those have all fallen, right? So the British Empire's fallen, Russian Empire's falling. The first three Reichs have fallen, with the third being Hitler and Nazi Germany. So the one that is, right, is the European Union, the Fourth Reich, the fourth head on the leopard. So what's the one to come? That's going to be the final beast. That is the New World Order. That is that global government that's going to have 10 horns, that's going to have 10 kings comprising it. So who's the eighth? The eighth is the Antichrist. And I believe that that is a better fit when you read through the wording in Revelation 17, okay? Is that the eighth that rises up, I believe, is more the Antichrist reign in that final 3.5 years when they're making war on the saints. So I believe that right now we're in the time of the European Union. We're in the time of the sixth head. I believe that there is one to come that will be whatever that global governance is. Now, is it going to be the United Nations? Is it going to be some other coalition? Is it going to technically have 10 nations a part of it? I don't know. But from the midst of that will be the eighth that belongs to the seven, and that's going to be the Antichrist, and that's going to be his reign. And that's when he's going to bring the great tribulation and make war on the saints and prevail against them and conquer them until Jesus returns. So what should we be watching for? Well, we need to be watching for the rise of the final beast, which will be a global government, right? The 10 horns, who are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they will, okay, together with the beast, and they're going to be of one mind, and they're going to give their power and authority to the beast, and they're going to make war on the Lamb. Okay, we just read those verses in Revelation 17. Again, it's unclear if it's a literal 10 or if that's symbolic, and unclear if it's going to be the actual whole world or what was the whole world in the biblical times. Like I said, Europe, Asia Minor, Middle East, North Africa. But we need to be watching for that. Okay. Now, when will this happen? Well, to get a sense of the timeline that's specific to that final beast kingdom, we need to look at Daniel 9, because the reign of the reign of the beast and the reign of the Antichrist, that's all going to take place in Daniel's final week, which is going to be the final 7 years. So in order to close out this lesson, I want us to touch on that, and we will continue to revisit Daniel's final week and Daniel 9 in order to use that to help us build a timeline, okay? But for right now, let's just get introduced to the prophecy of the 70 weeks, or the 77s, because each week represents 7 years, the 77s, okay? And for this, I'm going to be reading from the New King James, because the way it's translated, it's a little bit clearer in its wording about the distinction between the different periods of time that comprise the full 70 weeks. All right, so Daniel 9, we're going to start in verse 24. Okay. 70 weeks are determined. So as I said, each week is 7 years, so it's 77 for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Okay, so what he's saying is in this period of 70 periods of 7 years, this is everything that's going to happen across those 77, 490 years total. Verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem, okay, that happens in Nehemiah 2:1, the 20th year of Artaxerxes and 444 BC. So from that point until the Messiah, until Messiah the Prince, that's Jesus, okay, there shall be 7 weeks, 49 years, okay? So there's 49 years there and 62 weeks, 434 years, okay? So the first 69 weeks has already transpired from our timeline, okay, because we know that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem, which happened when the exiles were allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, until the time of Jesus, and specifically Jesus's death, and then the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, that corresponds to these years. However, I have read different things where they have to convert a solar year in the Gregorian calendar to a lunar year in the Jewish calendar in order to kind of make the years make sense. I'm not going to go into all that, but just know that that's what it corresponds to. So verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, 434 years, Messiah, Jesus, shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's the crucifixion in 33 AD. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And the people of the prince, so the prince who is to come, that's Nimrod. Okay, so we already know Rome was one of the Nimrods, and he destroyed the temple. But also, fast forward to the end, the final Nimrod. But okay, so that's the prince who is to come. Shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So, and the end of it shall be with the flood until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Verse 27. Then he, the Antichrist, again, Nimrod, right? So, and Nimrod, the final Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That's Daniel's 70th week, his final week or his final 7 years. So we've already seen the fulfillment of the first 69 weeks. So these 70 weeks are not consecutive, okay? That's why he breaks it down the way that he does. 70, then 62, and then 1 week, okay? So we have the 49 years, then 434 years, and then 7 years. They're not consecutive. But what he says is that what starts the final week is the Antichrist making a covenant with many. But in the middle of the week, well, what's the middle of 7 years? What's half of 7 years? 3.5 years. There it is again. He, the Antichrist, shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. That's what Jesus quotes in Matthew 24:15. Okay. The abomination who makes one desolate, even until the consumption which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Okay, so what we're looking for is the Antichrist to initiate the final 7 years by confirming a covenant with many, but 3.5 years into it, he's going to bring an end to the sacrifice and to the offering. All right, so some things to think about. If the end of so for 3.5 years, the Antichrist cuts off the sacrifices and the offerings, well, that has to be the last 3.5 years, because as of right now, they don't have a temple in Israel, and so the religious Jews do not do sacrifices according to the Old Testament law and sacrificial system. That's why you hear people talk about having to have a third temple built in order for them to resume animal sacrifices, so that 3.5 years after they resume the animal sacrifices, the Antichrist comes forward and puts a stop to them, right? So you can't put a stop to something that's already stopped. So that means between now and when the Antichrist stops, it's got to start. So the belief of a lot of people is that the final 7 years, it started with a covenant or an agreement, most likely some kind of agreement where the Jews can share the Temple Mount and they can rebuild a third temple. Now, I'm not convinced that it's going to be a brick and mortar temple. We know that there has to be an altar. We know that where the holy place is, we know that that has to exist because that's what's required for sacrifices. Plus, when we talk later, we'll talk more about other things we know about the Antichrist, but one of the things is he's going to go into the holy place and claim to be Messiah. Well, you can't go into a place that doesn't exist. So there has to be something where there's an altar where they can make their animal sacrifices, that the Antichrist will later come in and say, halt, stop, you're not doing that anymore because I'm the Messiah. So again, if there is like a false resurrection, that might be part of this, is maybe like they can do the animal sacrifices for 3.5 years, and then this Antichrist figure like does some sort of heroic what appears to be a martyrdom, and then he's resurrected, and so then he goes into the Holy of Holies and says, stop, you don't need to do it anymore because I'm the Messiah and I was just the final sacrifice. I don't know. I've heard others who say that they think that it's probably going to be something about like PETA, that you're going to have the animal rights activists who, once they start to see all the animals that are sacrificed as part of the Jewish religious system, that they're going to freak out, and that's going to be how they pressure, or at least the guise that's used in order to stop the animal sacrifices. I don't know which one it's going to be. But I do know there has to be an altar in some kind of holy place for them to resume the animal sacrifices so that the Antichrist can eventually put a stop to them. Now, what I'm curious about is whether or not it may not be, or whether or not it could be a tabernacle type situation. Because before King Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, the first temple, they were doing sacrifices, but they were doing them within the tabernacle. And so I'm wondering if there might not be some form of that. So what we do need to keep an eye on is progression toward the Jewish religious people in Israel, specifically in Jerusalem, resuming animal sacrifices. Now, we do know steps have already been made toward that, because there's a Jewish, I can't remember the name of it anyway, an institute that they have recreated according to Old Testament scriptures. They've recreated all the implements that are required to do animal sacrifices. The thing that's missing is that they have to be able to sacrifice a red heifer and use the ashes of the red heifer in order to consecrate and cleanse these implements that can then be used to do the animal sacrifices to atone for sins. So if you've not yet looked into this, it's quite a big deal that there are red heifers, and they actually came from Texas, and they're in existence right now. So that's something we need to keep an eye on, is when are they going to sacrifice the red heifer, because that is needed in order to cleanse the implements. But what's also needed is going to be an altar, so that once they've done that, the next step is that they have an altar in a holy place in order to resume animal sacrifices. Okay, so like I said, there are certain prophecies or certain steps toward the fulfillment of prophecy that's never happened before. Okay, so what I want to share with you is some headlines about the red heifer to show you how important and also how monumental and historical this is, because it's not happened since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. Okay, so this is a headline that was published August 7th, 2024. So last August, as you can see, just 8 months ago. And it says, Israelis practice red heifer ritual in front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Some religious groups believe the ashes of the cows can be used to build a third Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So what you see there is a cardboard cutout of a cow, um, which that cow actually wouldn't qualify as a red heifer, it has too much white on it. But what they did was they practiced slaughtering the red heifer and doing that ritual. Okay, so they have all the implements and they've now done a trial run, a practice run. They're ready to go. And in fact, they were going to do it until the Jewish government asked them to wait. Okay, so here's the second headline I have for you. This one's from January of this year, so just a few months ago. And it says, the first time after 2,000 years, Israel's biblical red heifers attract world attention. Okay. And so you can see it says in September 2022, the arrival of 5 red heifers in Israel caught the world's attention. Now, more than 2 years later, those cows are being cared for in ancient Shiloh and continue to attract international visitors. So they had 5 red heifers that showed up in 2022. We do know that since then 2 have become disqualified, okay? But what's also interesting is further down in this article is that it says Hamas reportedly blamed the red heifers in part for their invasion on October 7th, 2023, because of their belief that Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque would be in danger if the heifers were used to build the third temple. Okay, so September 2022, they bring 5 red heifers in. This makes news all over the world. 1 year later, October 7th, 2023, Hamas, we know, attacks Israel, okay? And one of the reasons that they give is the red heifers. They're aware of the red heifers and the significance of one of those heifers being sacrificed so that they can rebuild a third temple. They don't want that. So we are not yet at a point where they have a sharing agreement to do this, okay? And like I said, the reason why, so that was October 7th, 2023. A year later, in August of last year, 2024, they did a trial run. They were ready to go, but Netanyahu and the Israeli government asked them to wait because the reaction that the Hamas and other Muslims were having to the idea of it being done. Okay. So what does it mean for the red heifer? There's specific qualifications. One, it has to be an adult cow with reddish brown hair. There has to be no hairs of a different color. And what I've heard is specifically it can have no more than 5 white hairs. So that's why like some of them become disqualified. No blemishes. So these cows cannot be injured, cannot be damaged. There can't be any scars. There can't be any wounds, nothing on them. And they can have never been used for any other purpose. And so that's why right now they're almost a tourist attraction because they're not allowed to do anything other than exist and wait to see if they're going to be chosen to be sacrificed. So like I said, they're now down, as far as I'm aware, to 3. So there's still 3 candidates, but also in the meantime, Israel itself is working on breeding and having their own source of red heifers because these particular heifers came from Texas. Okay, so we need to watch for that. So we need to watch for this global government to come into power. We need to watch for an agreement that will allow the religious Jewish people in Israel to establish some kind of, whether it's a third temple or if it's more of a tabernacle structure, but they've got to be able to have an altar and a holy place to resume animal sacrifices, but they've got to sacrifice the red heifer first. That's got to be the first step. Then they have to have an agreement. Then they have to, so there's definitely work that still needs to be done. But like I said, this is the first time in 2,000 years that they've had a red heifer. So there is prophecy that's being fulfilled today. And that's why for me, I'm more and more certain that we're in that final iteration. Okay, so in our next lesson, we're going to be looking at Daniel 11 and 12. So if you want to read ahead, we're going to look at chapters 11 and 12, learning more about the antichrist, but especially how important it is for us to be wise in these end of days, in these end times. But again, remember that that's the purpose. The purpose of these prophecies is for the saints to be awake and ready for Jesus's return. Also, we're supposed to use this insight and this information that we have so that we don't get fooled, that we don't get led astray by the counterfeit, that instead we recognize the beast when it rises. We recognize the antichrist when he takes power, that we're not marveling after the beast like the rest of the world, but instead we see the truth, okay, and we see the counterfeit and we're not falling for it. It's also supposed to be an encouragement to each other that as we face tribulation and persecution and hard times and dark times, that Jesus is coming. coming. There will be an end, okay? That we are on the side of victory, that we need to persevere, that we need to endure to the end, okay? Also, Jesus gave us information in the Gospels and later through the revelations to the Apostle John so that we would be prepared. So, in both places, not just what we're looking at in Daniel, but specifically Jesus speaking in Matthew 24 and then later in the book of Revelations, it's saying, I'm giving you this information so that you're prepared, so that you understand. It's don't be scared, okay? Instead, be encouraged, be awake, which means be aware, okay? Be ready, right? Because in the midst of that Olivet discourse, when Jesus is talking about the end times, comes the parable of the talents and the parable of the virgins. We're not supposed to go and bury our talent and just wait. But also, we're not supposed to be the five foolish virgins who don't have enough oil. Okay. So we need to keep our wicks trimmed. We need to keep oil in reserves so that that fuel that we have to endure the long night. Okay. Because it's going to seem like forever to us for Jesus to come back, for the groom to appear. So we need to have that oil that's going to keep us burning for him. That's going to keep our faith alive. It's going to keep it all lit. Okay. We're supposed to be the light of the world. So keeping all that lit. Okay. All of that, that's what we need to be doing. And we need to use that to motivate us to stay faithful, to stay on mission, to have our wedding garments on, okay, so that we're ready when Jesus comes back. So this isn't about being scared. It's not about going and hiding. It's instead being encouraged and being bold and being on mission so that we're awake and we're ready and we're not falling for the counterfeit, and we're helping others to be awake and ready and not fall for the counterfeit, so that when Jesus comes, when he finally returns, we are all celebrating that return. But we got to go through some hard times. We got to go through some challenges, just like he did and just like he warned. Okay. But he says, take heart. Okay. Because he has overcome the world. So that's where I want to pick up next time as we continue to dive deep into these end time prophecies.